Rain tapped gently against the tall windows of the corner conference room, casting watery shadows across the long polished table. Elena Hart stood at the front, clutching her printed presentation, the numbers still crisp and ink fresh from her home printer. She had double-checked the charts at 5 a.m., before her son's cereal even hit the bowl. This was supposed to be her moment. She had spent weeks preparing a system-wide analysis for Nova Grid Solutions, a growing clean tech company in Seattle. Elena wasn't a team leader in name in the office, but she was the one who fixed the broken data pipelines when no one else could. She wasn't flashy, but she was reliable. Quietly essential. And today, she was ready to show it. Except she didn't get the chance. Halfway through her slide deck, just as she reached the core recommendation, a streamlined integration model that would save the company tens of thousands a year, her manager, Dorian Keene, leaned back in his chair and interrupted. Loudly. Deliberately. "You're a single mom with zero leadership background, Elena," he said, his tone soaked in smugness. "Don't expect a promotion just because you color inside the lines." He smirked. The room fell silent. No laughter followed. Just the low hum of the heating vent and the click of someone nervously tapping a pen against their notepad. Elena's fingers tightened around the report she was holding. Her first instinct was to defend herself. Her second was to run. But she did neither. She paused. Let the silence bloom. Then, slowly, she closed the folder of charts, nodded once, and walked out of the room. Every eye followed her. No one said a word. That was the part that stung more than Dorian's words, the silence. The colleagues she had helped late into the night. The analysts whose reports she'd cleaned up. The project leads who had praised her behind closed doors. Not one of them stood up. Not one pushed back. As Elena made her way down the hallway, past open doors and flickering overhead lights, she thought about how often she had been told to be patient, to wait her turn. How many times she had been encouraged to stay behind the scenes because real recognition takes time. But something in her cracked open that day. Not the kind of crack that makes you collapse, the kind that lets light in. Home was different. There, her son Ezra met her at the door, arms outstretched, a superhero cape dragging behind him and jelly on his chin. "You're late," he said. "Dinner's almost burnt." Elena laughed, kneeling to kiss the top of his messy curls. "That's your fault for making Grandma cook." In the kitchen, her mother, Leanne, stirred a pot of something that smelled like garlic and comfort. She glanced at Elena, eyes scanning her daughter's face the way only mothers can, and slid a mug of tea across the counter without a word. Elena sat. "Bad day?" Leanne asked, finally. "You could say that." Ezra ran into the living room, humming to himself, leaping from cushion to cushion like the carpet was lava. Elena let the silence hang, then quietly recounted what happened in the meeting. Every word. Dorian's comment. The silence. Her choice to leave. Leanne listened, stirring slowly. When Elena finished, her mother didn't offer advice. She just said, "The people who talk the loudest usually don't expect to be challenged. That's why they shout." Elena stared into her tea. "I should have said something." "You did," Leanne said. "You walked out. It didn't feel like enough. Not in that moment." Later that night, after Ezra had fallen asleep beneath a tangle of comic books and dreams, Elena sat in the corner of the living room with her laptop open. She wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. She reread her proposal. Line by line. Chart by chart. It was good. Not perfect, but solid. Smart. Forward-thinking. She added some clarifying notes, restructured the conclusion, and rewrote the executive summary with more punch. Then, without fanfare, she logged into the company's executive submission portal, a confidential space for cross-department ideas, and uploaded it under her name. No email. No plea. No qualifiers. Just the work. The next few days passed quietly. Elena dropped Ezra off at school in the mornings and returned to her desk like nothing had happened. Dorian strutted through the office with the arrogance of someone who believed he had won. She ignored him. She worked. Efficiently. Intentionally. But inside, something had shifted. She was no longer hoping to be seen. She was planting her flag. One evening, as she sat on the couch reviewing a side project, Ezra climbed into her lap with a drawing. "It's you," he said proudly. The paper was a swirl of crayons. A stick figure woman holding a laptop in one hand and a sword in the other. A tiny figure with curly hair stood beside her, arms raised like victory. Elena smiled, her throat tight. "Am I fighting something?" she asked. Ezra nodded. Yeah. Bad guys. And boring meetings. She laughed. Tough combo. You win in the end, he said matter-of-factly. She hoped he was right. She didn't know then that the seed she had planted in silence was already growing roots. That the new CEO had read her proposal. And that within days, everything was going to change. 3 days passed. Elena kept her head down, moving through the beige corridors of Novigrid like a ghost with a purpose. She still showed up early, still double-checked everyone else's numbers before submitting her own, still picked up the slack when others left projects half-finished. Dorian barely acknowledged her, and if he thought she was holding a grudge, he didn't act like it. To him, the moment had passed. But to Elena, it hadn't. It was still there, etched into the silence of the conference room, carved into the blank stares of people too polite to challenge a man like him. Yet underneath the routine, a strange current buzzed beneath her skin. The kind of instinct that told her, something is coming. It started subtly. A ping on her internal dashboard, proposal reviewed. Status, forwarded to executive level. No signature. No comments. Just a quiet notification that her work had climbed a step. She didn't mention it to anyone, not even her mother, not even over tea in the kitchen while Ezra danced through reruns of superhero cartoons. She'd learned not to get too hopeful. In the corporate world, even visibility was fragile. Then came the email. Subject, all staff, mandatory company address. Time, Friday, 10 a.m. Location, main floor auditorium. The company hadn't called a full staff meeting since their quarterly financial report 6 months ago. People buzzed with speculation. Was there a merger? A mass layoff? A scandal? Elena said nothing. She didn't have theories. She had work. Friday morning arrived with cool rain and heavy clouds. Elena helped Ezra tie his shoes, he insisted on the red ones with the lightning bolts, then drove him to school while the same indie playlist hummed through her speakers. Back at the office, she entered quietly and sat at her desk with her coffee steaming and her heart stubbornly steady. By 9:55 a.m., the auditorium was packed. Rows of fold-out chairs, the hum of conversation, the flickering projection screen at the front. Elena found a seat in the back. She didn't need to be seen. She just needed to listen. Dorian, on the other hand, sat confidently in the front row. He was even wearing his big meeting blazer, the navy one he usually reserved for investor visits. He leaned toward a colleague and whispered something with a self-satisfied smirk. Then, at 10:02, the room fell silent. A tall man in a gray suit stepped onto the stage with the kind of quiet authority that made you pay attention without knowing why. No notes. No entourage. Just calm focus. He introduced himself simply. My name is Julian Cross. As of this morning, I am the new CEO of Novigrid Solutions. Murmurs rippled through the room. Julian paused. Let the gravity of the announcement settle. I won't waste your time with promises, he said. Instead, I'll tell you why I'm here. He turned to the screen behind him. A digital dashboard appeared, simple, elegant, color-coded. Elena's proposal. 2 weeks ago, Julian said, I received this. People sat up straighter. The dashboard was unfamiliar to most of them, except the data team, and Elena. Her breath caught. It was submitted anonymously through our internal innovation portal, Julian continued. No fluff. No ego. Just strategy. Precision. Vision. I reviewed it line by line. Then I made some calls. Quiet ones. Because I wanted to know who created this. He turned back to the crowd. I found her. And I'm standing here today because of her. He pointed. Directly at Elena. It took a second for the room to react. Dozens of heads turned. Dozens of eyes widened. Elena felt the air shift, like a giant curtain had just been pulled back. She rose slowly. She could feel every heartbeat in her chest, but her hands were still. Her chin was high. She had spent years preparing for this without knowing it. Julian stepped off the stage and walked toward her. Elena Hart, he said, offering his hand. Your proposal is the blueprint for this company's future. I'm not here to lead a company stuck in the past. I'm here to build forward, with you. A stunned silence hung over the room. Then, applause. It started cautiously, a few claps from the back, then grew louder. Soon the room was full of it, real, earned applause. From the people who had watched her work silently. From the people who had dismissed her. From the intern who had once touched her arm in quiet solidarity. Dorian didn't clap. He just stared. Frozen. Pale. his hands tight on his knees. Julian continued, I've invited Elena to head up a new cross-functional strategy team. She'll have direct access to executive leadership. Because leadership isn't about volume, it's about value. Elena finally spoke. Her voice was clear, grounded. Thank you. I believe in what we can build, if we stop underestimating quiet ideas. More applause. As the meeting closed and people shuffled out, Julian stayed beside her. You didn't wait for permission, he said. That's what made the difference. Elena smiled softly. I couldn't afford to. By lunchtime, the company was buzzing. She returned to her desk to find 3 notes from colleagues, one from someone she didn't even know, thanking her for showing what was possible. She found a Slack message from a junior developer. I didn't think people like us could get noticed here. You changed that. And in her inbox, a message from HR. Subject, Promotion Confirmation, Director of Strategic Systems. Effective immediately. She stared at the screen for a moment, then turned slowly. Dorian's desk was empty. His nameplate had been removed. She later heard he had resigned, though no one used that word out loud. They said he'd transitioned out. Elena didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. Because this story wasn't about Dorian anymore. It was about her. About the moment the room turned, and didn't look away. Elena's new office wasn't big. It wasn't on the top floor, didn't have sweeping views of the skyline or some fancy espresso machine humming in the corner. But it had something better, light. Big windows spilled morning sun across her desk, and a whiteboard along the far wall was already filled with ideas, sketches, and post-its in multiple colors, her vision, taking form. And on her monitor, taped at the corner, was Esri's latest drawing, her, in a navy blazer and glasses, wielding a lightsaber made of spreadsheets. You look like a boss, Mom, he'd told her when he handed it over that morning before school. She was still getting used to the new title, Director of Strategic Systems. The email from HR had made it official. So did the new badge, which beeped her into restricted floors that used to feel a million miles away. But what really made it real was the way people looked at her now. Not like she was lucky to be in the room. But like she belonged. Still, the first few days were a whirlwind. Julian, Mr. Calm under pressure, didn't waste time. Build your team, he'd said. Start with the people who've been overlooked. Elena knew exactly who to call. Within 48 hours, she had a core team of 5. None of them had fancy titles. None of them played golf with a board. But all of them had something rare, hunger. Quiet brilliance. The kind that didn't need a spotlight to shine. First, there was Ari, a UX designer from the basement level, literally. No one had ever asked her for strategic input, but her user behavior mapping was revolutionary. Then Malik, a systems analyst with an eye for automation that could rival any consultant on the outside. Tanya from HR Analytics, who had once built the predictive retention model that had been shelved because it made people uncomfortable. And Ravi, a junior coder who had fixed a back-end bug that senior devs had blamed on a vendor. They were misfits, in the best sense of the word. We're not here to impress, Elena told them in their first team huddle. We're here to transform. They believed her. Because she had lived it. But not everyone was thrilled. Some of the old guard, the ones who had nodded along when Dorian sneered at her, suddenly found her presence inconvenient. They smiled too tightly in meetings. They asked questions that sounded like compliments but felt like traps. So, a cross-functional team reporting directly to Julian? That's unusual. Elena, can you remind us again what your background is in executive leadership? She didn't take the bait. She let the work speak. Because behind the glass doors and the Slack messages, behind the office politics and forced smiles, Elena had one thing none of them could replicate: clarity of purpose. Every late night she had spent building her proposal. Every bedtime story she'd cut short to answer emails. Every moment she doubted herself but hit submit anyway, it all meant something now. She wasn't there to prove she was capable. She was here to use that capability to shift the entire culture. And it was working. Within 3 weeks, their first initiative was Live, a real-time operational efficiency tracker that visualized team bottlenecks in a way the company had never seen. The rollout saved the marketing and dev teams over 100 hours in their first week alone. People noticed. Julian called her personally to say, "That's exactly the kind of impact I came here for." And others began to follow. One morning, as she walked through the main floor, a woman from accounting stopped her by the vending machines. "Hey," she said, her voice low but urgent. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened in the meeting. What you did. It mattered. Elena smiled. Thank you. I have ideas too, the woman added. But I've always been hesitant. You shouldn't have to be, Elena said gently. Come talk to me. We'll make room. It happened again the next day. And the day after that. Stories. Whispers. Confessions. Women, and men, from departments across the building stepping forward, testing the air, daring to believe maybe things were changing. Because someone like them had risen. And stayed risen. But perhaps the most profound shift happened at home. Ezra had always been bright, creative, full of odd little facts about space and animals and superheroes. But now, there was something else, pride. Real, tangible pride. He started asking Elena about her meetings. About her team. About what it meant to lead. Is it like being the captain of the Avengers? He asked one night over mac and cheese. Sort of, she laughed. But without the flying. He squinted at her. You fly. Just. Different. Leanne, watching from the sink, gave Elena a quiet nod. A mother's nod. The kind that says, I see you now, the way I've always seen you. Elena didn't cry. But her heart did something warm and whole. Later, when Ezra had gone to bed, and the house had gone still, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop, not to work, but to breathe. She scrolled back through her original submission. The dashboard. The strategy. The simple sentence she typed beneath her name. I believe this company can do better. She hadn't known then what would come from it. She had just believed in the truth of it. And now? Now the company was doing better. Because she hadn't waited for permission. Because she'd made the move, even when no one was watching. She closed the laptop and stared out the window into the night, her reflection faint in the glass. A single mom. A leader. A builder. Someone who didn't just turn a new title. She earned a new way of being seen. And she would make sure others saw themselves in her journey, too. Because the quiet ones? They were done being quiet. The elevator dinged softly as Elena stepped out onto the executive floor, a space she used to only glimpse when she delivered reports or joined overflow meetings. Now, she had a badge that opened these doors. And people noticed when she walked through them. Not because she demanded attention. But because she'd quietly, undeniably earned it. The last few weeks had been a blur of momentum. Her new team, dubbed the Forward Unit by someone in HR, had already implemented 2 internal systems that shaved inefficiencies by more than 10%. The company's project management software had been overhauled. Department heads were adapting to real-time visibility. And best of all, people were talking. Not in hushed tones like before, not about rumors or who was climbing too fast. Now they were talking about ideas. Elena passed by a cluster of managers huddled around a digital wallboard. They were pointing at metrics her team had created. No one had to say it aloud, but the shift was happening. And not everyone was comfortable with it. That afternoon, as she sat reviewing rollout feedback, she got a Slack ping from an old colleague, Layla, a junior comms associate from 3 desks down back in her analyst cubicle days. Hey, can I talk to you privately? Of course, Elena replied, already moving to book a quiet meeting room. They met in a small glass pod, barely big enough for 2 chairs and a faux plant. Layla looked nervous, her fingers twitching against her laptop. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't even be here, but I didn't know who else to go to. Elena leaned in, calm. What's going on? Layla's voice dropped. It's about Alan. From legal. Elena's expression didn't change, but her muscles tensed. Well, he's been making comments. Not about me, thank God, but about others. About the new tone of the company. Said things like, now every woman with a spreadsheet thinks she's a CEO in waiting. Stuff like that. Elena exhaled slowly. Has anyone reported him? Layla looked away. No one wants to rock the boat. I see. Elena took a breath. She'd once believed silence kept her safe. She knew now that silence only kept them comfortable. You did the right thing by telling me, she said. I'll take it from here. She filed the conversation away carefully, no rash reactions, no gossip, just facts. She spoke to HR quietly, directly. She made sure Layla wouldn't be looped in unless she wanted to be. Then she requested a private meeting with Julian. She didn't go in angry. She went in with evidence. And Julian listened. What do you want to see happen? He asked. I want it known, Elena said simply, that the changes we're making are permanent. That they're backed by leadership. That there's no room for the old way of thinking, not whispered, not joked about, not in meetings, not in break rooms. Julian nodded. Then we'll make it clear. The next day, he sent a company-wide message, not naming names, but naming values. At Nova Grid, leadership doesn't wear one face. It doesn't have one voice. It looks like results, integrity, and respect, for every team member. The voices that were once ignored are not a trend. They are our future. It was signed. Julian Cross, CEO, co-signed, Elena Hart, Director of Strategic Systems. Her name. At the bottom of a corporate-wide directive. That single line did more than 100 hallway whispers ever could. And the next time Elena passed a room full of executives, no one looked surprised to see her. They just listened. Back at home, life stayed delightfully ordinary. Ezra still refused to wear matching socks. Leanne still handed Elena a cup of tea without asking. But even in the routine, something felt changed. Like the air in their little apartment had shifted, filled with the echo of a woman who had been told she couldn't, and quietly did anyway. One Friday evening, as they prepared for family pizza night, Ezra tugged at her hand while she was setting the table. "Mom?" "Yeah, Bud?" "Someone at school said their dad works in a tall building with glass offices. I told them my mom owns a glass office." Elena laughed. "That's not exactly how it works." "Yeah, but it kinda is," he insisted, dragging his superhero chair to the table. Later that night, after bedtime stories and belly laughs, Elena pulled out her own notebook, not for work, but for herself. She wrote down every name of the people who had reached out since that meeting. The interns. The analysts. The administrative assistants. People she'd never met before. She realized something: they didn't come to her because she was powerful. They came to her because she made space. And space, real space, was the rarest, most radical thing of all. A few weeks later, a new hire orientation was held in the downstairs lounge. Elena wasn't scheduled to speak. But just as she was passing through, Julian pulled her aside. "Could you say a few words?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped up. The group was young. Eager. A few clearly nervous. She looked at them the way she wished someone had looked at her, back when she was doing everything she could just to be visible. "Hi, I'm Elena," she began. "Director of Strategic Systems. Single mom. Big fan of microwave coffee and early morning spreadsheets." A few chuckles. The room relaxed. "I'm not here because I raised my hand the highest. I'm here because I stopped waiting to be chosen." She paused. "I submitted an idea that no one asked for, because I believed it could help. And someone finally saw it. Now I try to see other people the same way. That's what this place is becoming. And if it's not what you see yet, help us make it that." Afterward, 2 new hires came up to her. One just said, "Thank you." That meant something. The other, a young woman in a press suit and chipped nail polish, whispered, "I thought I had to become someone else to belong here. Now I'm not so sure." Elena smiled. "Don't. Be you. Be excellent. That's enough." And that's when it clicked. The promotion had never just been about her. It was about the echo. The proof that when one voice refuses to shrink, others start to rise. The wind was gentle that morning, tugging at the corner of Elena's coat as she stepped outside her building, coffee in one hand, laptop bag in the other. The city buzzed around her, cars rolling past, cyclists zipping by, the occasional barking dog from the park across the street. But inside her? Stillness. Not the kind that meant nothing was happening, but the kind that meant everything had finally found its rhythm. It had been 3 months since her name echoed through the main auditorium, since Julian pointed to her in front of 100 blinking eyes and said, "I'm here because of her." 3 months since she'd stood in front of her colleagues, many of whom had once overlooked her, and accepted a leadership role she'd earned in silence. Now, Elena was no longer proving herself. She was building. The forward unit had grown. What started as a team of 5 had doubled. And then some. People wanted to be part of something different. Elena's team didn't just design systems, they rethought the way work felt. They introduced new workflows that prioritized balance and efficiency. They launched a mentoring program that connected junior analysts with senior leads, not based on department, but on potential. And it wasn't just internal impact. Novagrad's quarterly report showed their operational waste had dropped by 18%. Employee retention had jumped. Cross-department collaboration was up by nearly 30%. Julian often stopped by Elena's office, not to hover, not to supervise, but to learn. He'd lean against her doorway, sipping tea, and ask, "What are you seeing this week?" And she'd tell him, truthfully. No corporate gloss, no rehearsed bullet points. Just insight. One day, he asked her to co-lead a company-wide roundtable on leadership that listens. "I want people to hear how it actually works," he said. "Not from someone who inherited a title. From someone who earned it." Elena had smiled, leaning back in her chair. "You realize I'm going to say some things people might not like." Julian grinned. "Good. We're overdue." The round table was streamed company-wide. She sat at the head of the table beside Julian, surrounded by team leads, department heads, and rising employees from every floor. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't give a speech. She told a story. She talked about being told not to expect a promotion. About holding a report in her hands and realizing her entire value had just been reduced to a stereotype. About choosing not to shout, but to act. "I didn't submit that proposal for recognition," she said. "I submitted it because I believed the company could do better. That we could do better. And we are." She looked directly at the camera. "And if you're someone who's ever felt small in a room full of noise, remember this: volume doesn't equal value. You don't need to outshout anyone. You just need to outlast the doubt." There was a pause after she finished. The kind that lives between surprise and admiration. Then came applause. Julian leaned in and whispered, "That's going to be quoted in emails for weeks." She laughed. "I hope they get the point." Back at home, the impact was just as real, just quieter. Ezra had started referring to her as Captain Strategy. He'd made a mission badge out of construction paper that he insisted she wear to work. It read, "Director of Big Brain Stuff." She wore it on her coat, proudly, even if it earned puzzled looks in the elevator. One night, as they folded laundry on the couch, he asked, "Are you ever scared at work?" Elena paused. "Sometimes." He blinked. "Even now that you're the boss?" "Especially now," she said. "Because when you have power, you have to decide what to do with it. That's the part that matters." He nodded like she'd just told him how gravity worked. Then he leaned against her arm and whispered, "You're the kind of boss who makes it better for everybody else, too." She didn't respond with words. Just kissed the top of his head and pulled him close. Because that was the real reward. The legacy. Not just changing the room she'd been told she didn't belong in, but changing what the room meant. A few weeks later, Elena walked past a familiar hallway, one she hadn't seen in a while. Down on the second floor, where the analysts still buzzed quietly between tasks and group chats. She noticed something new, a photo collage on the corkboard. At the center? A snapshot from the round table. She, Julian, and the rest of the leadership team, sitting together, faces lit up with conversation. Around the photo, handwritten notes in colorful ink. "Representation changes everything. I stopped apologizing for my ideas. I spoke in a meeting today. First time in months. It felt good. Quiet doesn't mean unqualified." Elena stood for a long time in front of the board. Then someone tapped her shoulder. It was a young man, maybe fresh out of grad school. Nervous energy all over him. "Ms. Hart?" "Elena's fine," she smiled. "I just wanted to say, thank you. You made me believe it was okay to do the work first. And wait for the right moment to speak." She tilted her head. "And are you ready now?" He grinned. "Yeah. I think I am." She nodded. "Then let them hear it." That night, as she walked through the door at home, Ezra met her with a piece of paper. "New drawing," he announced. This one showed a room full of people. At the center was a figure, clearly Elena, with a coffee cup in one hand and a light bulb above her head. The caption? "She changed the room by being exactly who she is." Elena smiled, eyes stinging. "That's you, right?" he asked. She crouched down, hugging him tight. "Yeah," she said softly. "That's me." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just her. It was every woman who had been talked over in a meeting. Every parent balancing spreadsheets and school runs. Every person who'd ever been told to wait, to quiet down, to settle. She hadn't just walked into a room. She'd rewritten it. And now the door was open, for everyone else still waiting outside.